Good afternoon, Liberty North, AP and dual credit psychology. It is virtual Wednesday, December 16th. Sorry, I'm finishing my peppermint. Today we're going to be finishing up Unit 6, Learning. And again, we're talking about behavioral psychological learning with our third chart, which is observational learning. So again, you should already have your first two charts, classical and operant conditioning, which have been on the board since last Wednesday and are also on the live stream for December 9th. All right, and then today we will go over observational learning. And then after break, we'll go back and we'll number our learning targets. But this is really all you need in your AP learning targets for Unit 6 to complete your AP notebook learning targets section, okay? All right, observational learning. Historical name you need to know is Albert Bandura. Historic, iconic psychologist who is associated with the famous Bobo doll experiment, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, which is in Unit 6. He's also very famous for his social learning personality theory, which we will talk about when we get to personality. All right, but basically what they're going to want you to know in this unit is his work and his study on observational learning, which was the famous Bobo doll experiment. A Bobo doll, again, is the dolls that you blow up and then you punch them and they go down and pop back up. This one was in the face of a clown. All right, so basically Bandura was studying children and then was hypothesizing that they can learn through observational learning, violent and aggressive behaviors and language. So what they did is he taped an adult female doing 4 specific aggressive actions towards the Bobo doll. So she hit it, she kicked it, she threw it across the room, and then she hit it with a hammer, toy hammer. And then also there were 4 different types of aggressive kind of violent language that was being used, which was just describing what she was doing. So I hit it in the face, I kick it, you know, that type of thing. Well, he had that taped and then he showed the tape to a group of children. And then one by one, after viewing the model, beating up the doll and using aggressive language, they went one by one into a playroom that had the Bobo doll in it. And they just recorded the children playing with the Bobo doll. And lo and behold, they imitated what they saw and basically did the exact behaviors that the model did. Now, they also invented some new aggressive behaviors and aggressive language, but in essence, they observed and then they imitated the model, okay, which is observational learning, right? Okay, so observational learning is actually 2 types of learning. It's cognitive learning, right, which is basically any learning of a mental or cognitive idea, process, you know, and I've got learning of mental cognitive information here. This is on page 265. It's a vocab term as well, okay? Also, I think cognitive learning is anytime I use cognitive processes to learn, all right? Okay, social learning, which is page 304, which is specifically learning by observing others, okay? So I can observe a lot of things, but when I specifically observe other people, that's considered in psychology an aspect of social learning. So Bandura's actual Bobo doll experiment on observational learning would be a social learning because they were observing a model, a person, and it was on aggressive type behaviors, okay? All right, now to observe and to learn, you also need cognitive processes, which is kind of why it's cognitive learning as well, okay? All right, so the methodology for observational learning is obviously I'm going to observe, I'm going to watch with my eyes. I'm going to observe a model, okay? So again, the model was an adult female that the kids watched on the TV. And then I have a choice, which gets it back again to cognitive processes, to imitate or not to imitate. Now, children generally imitate, okay? So it was not a surprise that the children observed the model and then imitated her violent or aggressive behavior and then the aggressive language, okay? As you get older and as your brain progresses and develops more, you start developing those cognitive processes that they get a little more complex, mature, and then you kind of have a decision whether you want to imitate or not. At a young age, you generally, if you see it, you kind of imitate it. So if you think of kids, I mean, they see, they do everything that they see, they say everything that they hear, okay? So that's all part of that imitation process that is really strong when they're children. And then as our brain develops and grows, gets more complex, then we start getting into the fact that I don't have to imitate, okay? So, I think a great example of where this applies in your life is if you're learning any type of skill. So, you athletes, performers, if you have a job, anytime you have to learn a skill, primarily you're going to learn it through observational learning. You're going to learn it through observing a model of somebody teaching it or demonstrating it, and then you're going to try to imitate it the best that you can, okay? Now, you might not imitate other people who are also learning the skill, who might be doing it wrong. You kind of try to find out who are the models that are doing it correctly and imitate that, okay? So, but it could also be, if I'm walking down the sidewalk and it's slick and it's icy outside and I see a group of people fall down in front of me, I'm not going to imitate what they're doing. I'm going to walk more carefully, or I'm going to go around the spot that they slipped. So it's just as powerful the other way as it is. So the non-imitation is just as powerful as the imitation, okay? Especially when you get older and you're able to have those complex cognitive processes, okay? All right, now the book has a couple of other forms of cognitive learning, just so we know, and these are on page 297. Insight learning, which is when I have the aha moment, kind of like it finally just comes to me in a burst of knowledge and cognitive processes. Like if I'm working, on a math problem late at night, and it's frustrating me, and all of a sudden I just get the solution. I finally figure it out, and it just kind of bursts into my brain and my head, okay? Or, if you and a friend are working on a puzzle and it's just dead end after dead end, and all of a sudden, boom, just the solution becomes clear. That's insight learning, okay? Which is a cognitive process. Actually, we know that I think that's in the left frontal lobe when those happen. And then latent learning, which is learning that takes place, but then I don't demonstrate it until it's needed. So again, we are learning all the time through associations, through our thought processes, through observing, through biological means. We're always learning, and we don't stop and demonstrate everything that we learn all the time, okay? Or we'd be doing that constantly. So, most of our learning is we learn, and then we're going to hold it until we need it, and then we'll demonstrate it, okay? Which is latent learning. Now, education is based on an example of latent learning, and that's with tests and quizzes. When you cover a certain chapter or a unit, you're learning, hopefully, but you're not going to demonstrate it until the test or quiz is given, because then you need to demonstrate it. But then also, it can relate to opera conditioning. You're reinforced for doing so, and you're punished if you don't. Okay, so I get a good grade if I show you what I've learned, and I've learned it a lot, and I get a bad grade if I don't. So that's latent learning. And obviously that's cognitive learning as well, because it involves memory, many other things. But again, I have to store it, and I have to retrieve it. So that those are obviously complex cognitive processes there, okay? All right. And then lastly, the book wants you to understand that we also learn biologically, okay? Which is on page 292, okay? So besides classical, operant, and observational learning, which are learning techniques in psychology that everybody agrees with and everybody knows that they work, what might change is how you describe and why each one works. So we've got associative learning, which is simply we learn by association, which we do, which is kind of the behavioristic explanation. We learn through cognitive learning, which is the cognitive perspective explanation. And we also learn biologically, okay, which is the biological perspective explanation of behavioral learning. So biological learning says that we are biologically predisposed to learn and to learn certain things that help increase our survival. So learning obviously has a very high heritability factor. If we are able to learn and we learn better, it increases our likelihood to survive. So they believe that we are programmed to learn to increase our survival. Okay, and they would say that we're programmed to learn through associations. So we talked about it. Our brain actually tries to pair things together, try to associate things together so that we learn, especially cause and effect stuff. Our brain tries to kind of link together. So we have talked about it, with pain, fear, food poisoning, and we've done some pretty specific examples. We even talked about superstition, which again is an association that doesn't necessarily exist, but our mind is making it. Okay. And these are just a few examples of biological learning. And then mirror neurons, which your book talks about, which are neurons in our brain that are specifically there to learn through observation. So they work with my eyes, and in certain parts of my brain, they learn and record information that we see so that we can learn through it and grow through it. So again, our brains are kind of biologically set up and predetermined and predisposed to learn through observation, okay, to learn through associations, right? And also, obviously, they're meant and developed so that we can think, right? So that we can interpret, so that we can perform mental processes, right? So, again, everybody's going to say classical conditioning works, operant conditioning and observational work. They're real. But what we might do is we might have different explanations of why they work, whether it be the behavioristic approach, the cognitive approach, or the biological approach, okay? So, I personally think it's an eclectic view. I think behavioral learning takes place, behaviorism, because it's in the environment, and there definitely is associations that we make. It's obviously cognitive because it involves thought processes. And then it's obviously biological because we're predetermined and we're made biologically to be able to learn because it helps us survive, okay? So besides the 3 different techniques, just also know the behavioristic view, cognitive view, and biological view of learning, which is basically just what the perspective says, okay? So another good example is cognitive psychologists are going to agree that classical and operant conditioning work. They're just going to they're going to say that, that you have to mentally link the stimulus and the response together. You have to mentally link the behavior and the consequence together. So yeah, there's an association that's there, but it's a mental. I have to determine the predictability, the mental link of the items together. Okay. So it's just kind of a different explanation of why it works. Okay. All right. So that's all you need in your AP learning targets for Unit 6. So just make sure you have the 3 charts. And you'll be fine there. Make sure you get your vocab done. And remember, your final on Thursday and Friday is simply just turning in your AP notebook. So you're just going to leave it with me, and I'll look over those during break. So come with that prepared. That's 100 points. And then we will finish up the semester on Thursday and Friday. I know it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't even feel like December 15th, but we made it, and we'll finish it up then. Have a good virtual Wednesday. Email me or Zoom with me if you have any questions.